It was under this stress that Miles Fa played his next card. I have to show you something. Solve the World. A fictional adventure told in 100 episodes. Episode 49. Up in the Air. There is a list. The list is revised once a year. It merely tallies a few dozen names. The word was out on young Miles Fa pretty early on. By his 7th birthday, he was already getting invitations into smart cliques like Mensa, and solving calculations like the square root of 9,872 in his head in under 2 seconds for important, on-looking academics. By Master Fa's 9th birthday, he was on the list. Few people know about the list, but if you think about it, it's a very logical thing, a rational idea, if you will. An international firm known as the Darwin Amadeus creates this list. They sell it each year for several $billions. The idea is simple. History tells us that once in, say, every 100 million births, a true genius is born. Michelangelo, Einstein, Oppenheimer. 500 years ago, the world population was between 300 and 500 million. That's roughly equivalent to the population in the United States alone nowadays. During the year 1500, there was, according to Darwin Amadeus, probably 5 geniuses walking the face of the earth. That number, now that we live in a world populated by 7 billion souls, should be around 70 true geniuses. The Darwin Amadeus list enumerates those 70. Once on the list, 9-year-old Miles Fa and his family became accustomed to visits by mysterious suitors. Most came representing certain industries: big pharma, big tobacco, private competitors to the CDC, heads of state. Miles could recall for you a memorable day in which a consulting firm tried to convince him to begin working towards a career in politics. If Miles' parents had agreed to give the youngling over to the firm's custody, they'd see to it that the family had access to an overseas account with a net worth of $100 million. This offer, the Fa family declined. They figured, rightly, that if Miles was worth $100 million in the political world, he'd be worth at least double that to the figureheads in more lucrative fields. Miles was 11 when the family finally sold him out. Payoff was supposed to be worth $1 billion between annuities and certain IRAs and property values. Miles was transferred into the custody of an unnamed source. This anonymous bidder would see to Miles' expert education in any field Miles so desired. Young Miles chose for the longest time not to choose a specific expertise to educate himself in, but more and more as his teenage years paddled on, he found himself interested in his own mind and what power he could wield with it. This led him to spend the vast bulk of his time understanding the art of propaganda. But geniuses do what geniuses do, and that, perhaps more than anything else, is meld one sphere of influence with another. Propaganda as a whole had too low a ceiling for a developing child with nearing infinite possibilities. But add a dash of applied theoretical physics to Leni Riefenstahl, Ayn Rand, and kamikazeism, and you have a recipe for true power. Here's the secret. A 17-year-old Miles discovered a tonal range that, played in conjunction with the spoken word, increased the hearer's probability to accept the words as truth by nearing 100%. The tones are above the spectrum of sounds our ears can hear, but it doesn't matter. In fact, not hearing the tones manifestly adds to its potency. Say to a stranger, "Give me your wallet," and you will be scoffed at. But say that while the right high pitch is played, and the words "give me your wallet" vibrate deeper into your body. They reverberate through your bones, instinctually informing you that what is being said is internally true. So true that your body echoes the message through your physical cage, over and over. Now, there are a couple snags in this mind-controlling technique. For one, the tone is based on the proportions of the recipient's passageways, meaning a small child will vibrate to a much different tone than a tall basketball player. Finding each person's tone takes great calculations. Calculations that, say, a mathematical genius can do in his own head while the rest of us would sweat over pen, paper, and calculator. To this day, Miles hasn't been able to entirely solve the equation. His success rate is somewhere around 92%. That's fantastic, phenomenal, unbelievable, but not unbreakable. When he first made the discovery, it was by blaring an electronic tone while he spoke. That was okay, but not ideal. His invention, which the powers that be that Miles worked for greedily took from him, was a little voice modulator that sat in the back of the mouth. Miles knew this device was far too awkward. No one wanted to carry around a mind-controlling instrument in their pocket all day long, just waiting for the right moment to slip it halfway down their throat. No, it wasn't feasible. That's why Miles Fa worked with an underground surgeon over the next 2 years to have an operation done. The surgery was a success on two fronts. For one, his masters, the people he served as something of an indentured servant, never grew wise to this final experiment. And secondly, it worked. Miles had a small incision cut into his vocal cords. It worked something like LASIK for eyes. It caused his voice to vibrate on two spectrums at once. Miles Fa, whenever he so desired, could mentally calculate the frame of the person he wished to manipulate and, voila, influence with secret tones and vibrations the thoughts and decisions of said person. Being a genius, and having the power of suggestion at the ripe age of 19, made Miles Fa something less than a good man. If a list was made that enumerated his wrongdoings, we would be here listening to that list for a fortnight. Miles used his powers to get the big three: money, women, power. It also, however, garnered the attention of someone who didn't give a flying pig who was on the Darwin Amadeus annual list. Someone who would skew the rest of his life. Someone that would teach him what the real war is about. Tonight, Miles had used his 92% effective power of suggestion to make Lorna von Schloss plummet to her own death. It hadn't been the first time he'd manipulated a suicide. Marshal Winston glared at Miles Fa while he scratched his tattoo. The soothing sensation calmed him, yes, but more importantly, re-centered him, reminded him what his objective was. He was thankful for the note from Father Beck he'd gotten that evening. The note read simply, "Don't lose her." It had been months now since Marshall had sat down with Regional Director Father Beck, receiving instructions as to how to deal with this new Naime. Most people don't tag around with leprechauns and still have an innocent, open demeanor about themselves. Jennifer Dash, now rebranded as Naime, showed off these traits with a certain chemistry mixture that Father Beck had rarely seen. He knew this one's important. He connected that somehow. But he also assumed that Jennifer might not even know this about herself. So then the die was cast that Marshal Winston would be the provocateur that solved the enigma that was the bright-eyed teenage girl from Louisiana. Had Jen Dash listened in on that conversation between Father Beck and Marshal Winston all those months back, she wouldn't have guessed that they were talking about her. Father Beck used adjectives like young, naive, friendly, innocent, open. Once upon a time, Jen could have associated these words with herself. But not now, not after killing Tiff, not after having her hand cut off, not after praying away the Leviathan, the one thing she desired to see for so long, and especially not now, not after she witnessed her work partner, Lorna von Schloss, fall down the pit of wisps. In this moment, the adjectives that Jen would use to describe herself would be something like senseless, disorderly, confused. But always, always, always a survivalist. Right now, she needed, in order to survive, to figure out Miles' Fa. He may be working for the enemy. He may just be trying to extract something out of Jen. Did she have a secret that he might want? Why did he say he loved her? She believed him in her head, in her mind, but as she scratched the small of her back, Naime's heart told her to shut the doors. Let no man enter here. Abandon all hope. What do you want? Naime said in a defiant tone to Miles. I have something to show you. Okay, show us. Miles looked to Marshall. Not with him. He stays behind. Marshall scratched his tattoo and spat on the ground, his spitwad brightly illuminated under the big moon sky. Nope, I'm coming with, Marshall stated. You are responsible for a young woman's death. You've done enough. That one, that tone, struck. It didn't matter what toxins Marshall's tattoo released. That one had to stick, even though it was a ludicrous idea. But no, you killed her, Naime said. Don't play games. Just say what you need to say, Miles, before I ask you to jump after Lori. This was all very challenging to Marshall Winston. He'd heard of mind manipulators before, knew that this Miles Fa character was supposedly the best at it, but Marshall never before comprehended how hard it is to resist the puppeteerism. In order to defy Miles, Marshall had to defy himself. He needed to act against his own conscience. It felt horrible, and he wouldn't have the guts to do it, but somehow Naime was able to break through. She was defying the trespasser's words. If she could find a way, maybe he... I'm confused, Marshall said dumbly, and buried his head in his hands. James Bond-esque figures never say, I'm confused. Can we just walk away from the pit? It makes me nervous, Miles stated. Again, to Marshall Winston, the words were like music. Yes, of course. That's all anyone has ever wanted, to get away from the pit. Who even likes the pit? It's creepy. Come to think of it, the pit made Marshall nervous too. Maybe this Miles guy wasn't so bad. At least he's asking reasonable things. Yeah, let's get away from here, Marshall said. No! Not until I know what you're doing here, Naime again said defiantly to both men. I told you. I love you. Marshall sighed. He'd only known Naime for a few months. Whatever feelings he'd begun to muster for the pretty young lady surely were no match for the cavernous depths of truth and beauty that Miles felt for her. That's not a reason. I care about you, Miles stated. That's not an answer. I need to show you what happened to Lilith Babbitt. Okay, what happened? The whole world knows, and the whole world is seduced. Naime, Marshall butted in, we need to figure this out. Let's see what the man has to show us. No, Marshall, no. I don't even know if I believe in love, so why should I believe you right now, Miles? Give me some evidence. Give me something to hold on to. With that statement, the situation crystallized for Miles. Suddenly, he understood. His projection of, I love you, didn't fall on deaf ears. Jen hadn't been one of the 8% that for whatever reason wasn't susceptible to his powers. No. He'd hit her straight down into the gut, his words vibrating through her body. But the problem wasn't his words. It was love. Jen didn't know what true love was. Miles had believed, after long talks way down waiting in Pishtako's lair, that Jen did believe in love. That she did know how. What had changed? It's the end of the world, Jennifer. It's the end of the world, and when you realize that, it becomes perfectly clear that the most important thing is to be with the people you love. Tears welled in Jen's eyes. You killed Lori, didn't you? You killed my friend. Out of the corner of his eye, Miles sniped Marshall, trying to intake his reaction to all this. A wrong answer here could unhinge the third party, and another wrestling match above the endless hole wasn't beyond the pale. I didn't know how else to manage the situation. I was safe. You didn't have to do anything, Jen protested. Jen, this girl knocked you down, made you dangle by a rope. She was a wild card, and with this guy here trying to take me out, I did what I thought was best. Punching women in the face, telling them to commit suicide? It's all part of your plan, isn't it? No, I have no plan. Don't lie to me! Naime, it's okay, Marshall Winston offered. Let's call a truce. You show us what you want to show us. Let's get away from here, get away from the pit, and then you'll let us go do whatever we want to do. right? Miles frowned at Marshall's recasting of the situation. I'm not holding you hostage. I just want to show you something. Okay, where is it? Naima demanded. Maybe 200 paces? Miles swirled around, looking as if he was struggling to get his bearings. That way. The odd trio marched towards whatever it was Miles wanted to show them. Jennifer Dash was nearing a panic attack. This sudden incident with Miles brought up gunky thoughts and memories that Jen hadn't yet fully processed. She wanted answers from Miles. Why did he hit Lex and command his two female counterparts to drown themselves? How did he convince the numbered man to let Jen and Lex go? Why did he get so angry with the Orion when they decided to hunt for the diseased island? Why did he lose his cool then? And why did he just tell her he loved her? Like a rushing river, these thoughts swept over Jen's mind, fogging up her vision. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to ask Miles anything more. He never gave a real answer in his whole life. Nearing an open pasture, Marshall realized where they were and shivered. Hey, look, we're nearing the perimeter of the center. I'm not sure where the exact mark is, but what? Miles said. But if we trip the perimeter, the center will know we're leaving. And then what happens? Marshall glared at his competitor. They'll come after us. Who? What? What will? It's hard to say what. Then what are you worried about? It's hard to say what, but I know who it'll be. Okay, inform us. The spirits of the Druidry. Naima didn't expect Miles to take that line seriously, but his face turned ashen at his hearing. He nodded solemnly and replied, Okay, this clearing. You think we're safely in bounds in the middle of the pasture? Yeah, the edge is somewhere beyond those rocks. Marshall pointed with two fingers at a point maybe 50 meters off. Marshall never pointed with one finger, always two. One was weak. Two was firm. In the middle of the field, under the myriad stars, Miles sat down and took his shoes off. He seemed to be examining the heel of his foot. Anyone have a knife or sharp object? He asked. No answer, just a mumble from Naima. What are we doing here? Miles surveyed the land, hobbled over on one foot to a spot a couple meters away, picked up one palm-sized stone, scanned the ground, then picked up another. He sat back down and beat the two rocks together until one of them broke off into several shards. He held one shard up in smug satisfaction. Sharp point. Naima and Marshall watched as Miles used his sharp point to surgically remove what looked like a red grain of rice out of his heel. Got it. Miles showed off the riceling before smashing it on the ground into a million pieces with the yet unbroken rock. Now, we wait. What was that? Marshall asked. Just calling a taxi. Huh? Marshall asked in grunt form. A grunt Miles chose to ignore. Jen, I feel like I owe you an explanation. Why you said you loved me? Jen blurted out. No. Not about that. I thought that one was rather self-explanatory. I meant about the island. The last time we were together. I'm listening. Remember when we split up, searching for a way out? Yeah, Lex found a classroom. I found that cave painting and all those steps. You found just a river and mud? Yeah, I didn't quite tell the full story. Here's how Miles Fa retold his personal excavation on Pishtaco's island. That day, when Miles had written in the ground directing Lex, Jen, and himself to explore the cave tunnel system individually, he found himself in a perilous situation. He was stuck in mud and water in some cramped, hedgy tunnel. He was sinking. Death was leaping towards him, reaper in hand. The truth of the matter was, he was too crammed in. He couldn't turn around. He tried desperately several times to keep his head above the mud-water horizon, but he kept slipping downward. His muscles were fatiguing. His up-down orientation in this void of black death was enveloping his mind, reaching beyond his ears and strangling his sense of direction. So, Miles stopped fighting. Like a car sliding on ice, he made the executive Hail Mary call that rather than fight against the gnawing, grabbing mud, he'd push into it. He knew most likely that sinking deeper would seal his fate, and do so in an efficiently speedy manner. But this choice was the only one that had any wildcards associated with it. He tried backpedaling. That didn't work. He couldn't go forward any longer. The mud's pull made a constant, fruitless stalemate of a struggle. Down, down was the only mystery left to uncover. And in mystery, Miles found life. He sank and sank and sank, the air in his lungs evaporating, his body spasming for oxygen, for a lifeline. Then, he hit the netting. It was the same sort of stuff that he, Jen, and Lex were stuck in for days on end when they first began to starve on the numbered man's hideous island. The netting stopped Miles from sinking and was holding the muddy earth above him in place. But just beneath the netting, air. Sweet air. Miles pushed his face against the net straps and breathed again. After sufficient oxygen intake, Miles was able to open his eyes and take in the long stadium hall below him. Miles Fa managed to find the artificial, mud-dripping ceiling of Pishtaco's main lair. There was a throne, which was covered in mud as it kept being dripped upon by wet earth seeping through the netting and pummeling down, at least 30 feet down, to the crazy genius's sanctuary floor. There, the numbered man, seated on his throne. Miles stared down at the huddled mass of flesh. He was a big, fat thing. He was bald, and it looked like the skin itself had been dripping off his skull. The top of the numbered man's head was pink, purple, and pasty white. It looked like the white top layer over time was melting from the top down, revealing grotesque layers of underflesh, pinks, reds, purples, and all bloody hell. The numbered man was speaking loudly, apparently to a herd of 5 hedgies. The hedgie at the front of the pack looked different from the others, different from any of the ones Miles had seen before. It was taller, maybe 4 feet high, and looked more human than the others. It could have been a split creation, exactly half human, exactly half hedgehog. It actually had a humanish face, and it was speaking English.
113 says they split up exploring.
Good, good. I'm glad they'll see my many wonders. And the couple, they too split?
Yes. All 3 went separate ways.
That may be problematic for us. We should convince Lex that the other 2 are in cahoots. If she feels abandoned, she'll be more likely to accept our genius offer.
Yes, sir. How should we do that?
When they're all back together, once they're asleep, let's cause a little landslide. Separate Miles from the other 2. Then, let's see. Maybe it's time to play our Merkel card. Send Merkel in, to Miles. Have Merkel make up a story. That he has a plan. That he can save Lex if she's the one left behind. Get Merkel here. We'll come up with a story. If we can convince Miles that he can win, from all sides, if we get him and one hand off the island, then everything will fall into place. Miles will bring the rescue team, maybe some military, and we'll have our world platform finally. This is working better than I could have dreamed. God is blessing us, 038. Oh, how he loves us. You understand your orders?
Yes, sir. Just which one is Miles?
He's the man. Isolate the man.
Yes, sir. Just which one is the man?
The one with the deep voice.
Anyway, sir, that we can see which one she is.
He. Which one he is.
At that moment, the ever-pushing mud found a crevice in between the netting and Miles' mouth, causing a rather large glob of mud to suck into Miles' nose as he attempted to breathe. He instinctually choked on the mud up his nose, causing something of a ruckus and spitooning a ball of mud down the sanctuary, plopping a foot behind the numbered man's throne. Miles froze as the numbered man turned his face to the ceiling. Miles was spotted. But no. The numbered face, his eyes, or the place where his eyes should be. It was all acid melted. The numbered man was blind. Miles understood. Yes, there were speakers throughout the cave system, but there were not microphones as they had suspected. The numbered man relied on the eyewitness accounts of his mutant henchmen to convey news to him, but the Hedgies had a weakness. They apparently couldn't tell the difference between genders, and Merkel seemingly somehow was working with them. Looks like I'll have to finish the story later, Miles said as he looked up into the sky. Intuitively, Marshall and Jen followed Miles' look up and saw for themselves what was descending. A large, gray, hot air balloon. Our taxi is here. A rope was thrown down by a woman manning the balloon. Shall we make our exit? Miles smirked. This is what you came to show us, Marshall said, unamused. No. Miles caught up to the woman in the balloon, balancing now 10 or so feet above the three on land. Bashrina, would you throw down my tablet? The woman grabbed something out of a backpack and tossed it down, wherein Miles delicately swooped the computer mechanism into his hands. Let's see if we have a signal way out here, shall we? Marshall and Jen chose to huddle around Miles, curiosity causing them to peer down at his tablet. Well, would you look at that? One strong little bar. We're in business. Miles logged onto YouTube. He clicked on a video that boasted 2 billion views. It was titled simply, Summer Solstice at Stonehenge. Jennifer was nervous. As it stood, she was right to be. Her demons were back to haunt her. Her decisions on full display. On YouTube, a phone video is turned at its narrator and friend who appear to be lying in a field. The main guy and his gal both looked nervous, but hyper as well, that common blend of fear and excitement. Okay, here's the deal. We wanted to come to Stonehenge today, but we were cordoned off about, a kilometer away. We drove around in pretty much a big circle. More or less. The other person staring at the camera interjected. Yeah, more or less. And, everywhere we went, there were these uniformed guys that said Stonehenge was closed today. We talked to 10 different people. All said the same thing. We gave up, drove to a bar nearby, asked the barkeep what was up. He said Stonehenge had been bought out today. He thought that some group had paid off the authorities to use Stonehenge exclusively during the solstice. So we walked here, snuck around some officers and stuff. We didn't come all the way from Florida to not see Stonehenge. But look, the guy turned his phone around. There was Stonehenge, ancient monoliths erected in a circle in the middle of nowhere. It was sunset, and walking from stone to stone, an aging woman, well-groomed and well-dressed, was splashing buckets of blood onto each pillar. We hear the narrator remark as the woman dunks her head in the bucket of blood. We're far enough away so that we don't hear what the woman is saying, but she looks to be meditating or reciting some sort of chant. All this while the sun is cresting just over the horizon. The woman marks herself, pacing back and forth, now seemingly counting, from each stone to the center of the circle. She stands, head black-red with blood, stretches her arms out crucifix style, and raises her head to the heavens. What's she doing? The narrator quivers. The bloody woman holds the position for 10 seconds. 20. The edge of the sun drips under the horizon's bow. The woman, Jennifer clearly recognized as Lilith Babbitt, flew up into the sky. Well, not flew. It looked like she was picked up by an invisible hand. She ascended like a dart into the hemisphere, like a marionette wrenched up by the heart, like a magnet pulling its other half home. Our main guy runs, still yelping screams of disbelief, and that's where the video stops. It's a fake, right? Marshall asked. No. Miles said resolutely. Every expert in the world's given it their thumbs up. This is no joke. Lilith, Jen said. Yeah, and I think you know whose blood she used. Jen turned, hopped onto the hot air balloon, now hovering just a few inches off the ground. She got in, not acknowledging Bashrina, the air taxi's operator. No. She hunkered down, putting her hands in her knees. Jen was no dummy. She put the pieces together, saw how her decisions along the way played into Lilith's plans. Mrs. Babbitt had found the Fountain of Youth, but no one lives forever on this wicked ground. Lilith Babbitt was commuting with the gods, and that, my friends, is not done here on Earth. Miles, always unpredictable, started sprinting. Not to the balloon, not at Marshall Winston, but to the edge of the field, to the rocks that Marshall had pointed at with 2 fingers. Marshall was a smart guy, but he couldn't process all this. What did he just watch? Where was Miles going? He stood, watching the world unfurl around him. Miles ran, literally tagged the rocks, and then sprinted back. He whizzed past Marshall, flying up and into the balloon. Basharina, the half-Nigerian, half-Saudi Arabian assistant, set the air on fire. The balloon took to the sky. "I thought I'd make your decision easier," Miles called to Marshall. "They should be coming for us now, right?" "Yeah," Marshall replied dumbly from the field. "If you want to live, you better get in then." Miles didn't know this man, this Marshall Winston. Didn't know what he was up to, but he figured it was better to take this talker with them than have him stay behind and blab to the Neo-Druid powers that be. In the distance, barking. They were coming. Hunting. The words on the note from Fodderbeck rang through Marshall's mind. "Don't lose her." Clutching the rope that dangled from the balloon, Marshall pulled himself up the floating carriage. As he pulled up, the spirits came. There are rules, friends, and in this case the rules spared Marshall's life. The dogs came, barking their faces off at the gently floating albatross above their heads. Realizing they were not going to be able to get the balloon, the air above the center not considered their territory, they did what they do. First, they turned back to their normal, ghastly, over-big bunny look. Then, for Marshall, they turned into a dozen versions of his parents. He huddled down into the base, besides the curled-up Jen. "Don't look down," he said. Being human, Jen seized with curiosity, hoping for some reprieve from her torturous self-condemnation. She got up and looked down. The Pukas looked up at her with the eyes of dead Tiff, dead Flusher O'Malley, dead Red Jeb Heller, and there she was, dead Lorna von Schloss. Beside the imitation of the fallen blonde from San Diego was the image of a little boy. A boy Jen had helped save from a witch and a leprechaun. A boy she thought she was really helping. A boy who had lost his mother, was betrayed by his father. A boy who knew no happiness. The lost boy of Liechtenstein looked up at Naime, now returned to us as Jennifer Dash from the sacred groves of the Druidry Center at New Grange, Ireland. Little Robin was the sacrifice. A goat to send the leprechaun on his way, and the blood of an orphan virgin to send Lilith Babbitt into the heavens. The world seemed infinitely complex, and every turn had rotted from within. Jennifer Dash hunkered back down in the hot air balloon, not caring to take in the beauty of the silent night countryside. "Jen, there's more," Miles sighed. No more. There's literally no more," Jen pouted. "Yes, there is." Miles flipped the tablet onto Jen's lap. Another video, this one, a news report, began playing. Jen and Marshall watched and listened as they took in scene after scene, report after report, of millions dying, radical new laws to stop the increasing death tolls, and together they succumbed to the reality that a virus, the very one that robbed Jen of her natural hand, was destroying the world. "We don't have much time," Miles said. "That's why I had to get you. And, well, we've come up with a plan." They floated on. Marshall and Jen kept watching videos. It was intoxicating, addicting even. Everyone, at some point in life, fantasizes about the end of the world, but to actually see it unfolding in front of you, it's weirdly riveting. You find yourself searching for a reason. Surely, at the end of days, the meaning of life will come into focus. This was it. You reach the end of humanity's story, and you're going to find that either everything had an ultimate purpose, or it didn't. What's it all for? Chaos or reason? Jen learned that night also of Onmo, Operation No More Orphans. She watched the president's address, and the honest face of Scout Further caught her heart. How could that just be coincidence? She made no mention of what she saw to Miles Marshall or Bashrina. She wanted to keep at least one card safe. Then came the last bit. In the wake of Lilith Babbitt's magical abduction into the skies, a worldwide cultish fascination with her was developing. Investigations into Lilith Babbitt, former heiress of Magical Kingdom, ran rampant. There was no end to the conjectures and the often suicidal attempts to recreate her magic trick. But the one name that, as investigators searched for Lilith, kept coming up was the name Jennifer Calling. "The world's looking for you," Miles said. "They think you're the link to Lilith." "Why?" "Because of the book." "The book?" "The Croatoan. I don't have it." "Doesn't matter. The world thinks you do. I guess Lilith left some sort of note with her lawyer." "Mark Janner?" "Yeah. According to him, she left Janner a message saying that she left the book in your hands. Are you sure you don't have it?" "What? No. Do I look like I have it?" "Maybe she left it somewhere where she knew you'd find it?" No. Marshall stared at Jen, still unable to get a handle on the string of events that just took place. He had always sensed the name and was special, but this special? Special enough for the whole world to be looking for her? Before they touched down, made landfall safely outside of the center's grasp, Jen resolved herself to 3 conclusions. 1. The world had gone to hell. 2. Jen couldn't save anyone, but maybe she could save everyone. If she had to take out people in the process, that was acceptable. People die in this world. It's not Jen's fault. Not Tiff's death, not Lori's death, not anybody's. 3. Jen's mission was to kill the Piper. Surely it was he who was the architect of all the world's suffering. It wasn't Tiff's fault. She was born on the streets. The world was already in motion to the ocean long before she was born. It wasn't the Patriot's fault or the Numbered Man's fault. As weird and as wicked as they were just byproducts of a broken world. It had to be the Piper. Jen concluded that if she succeeded in snuffing him out, the test of her true success, of her hypothesis, will be whether or not Scout's life and innocence is saved in the end. Scout was the emissary of the world. She represented the world not undone. She represented Jen, before all the world's hardships seeped into her soul. Jen liked these new guidelines. What pleased her about them was that they were no longer Jen-specific. They weren't a list of personal do's and don'ts. Jen wasn't a character in the story any longer. At the end of all things, who was? No one. No one. Everyone on Earth was just pawns, obstacles, agents of movement and chaos. That was all. Individuality didn't matter. Who cares about a stupid mythical sea serpent anyway? Landfall. They touched ground in the backyard of a little cabin, out in the middle of who knows where. Running out the door to meet them, a familiar face, the venerable Sir Isaac. "Do you have it?" he called out to Jen. "Do you have the book?" Hey guys, Solve the World is produced by me, Dante Stack. All music and sound effects can be found on our show notes page at dantestack.com. Just one more episode in part 2, guys. Send whatever questions you have about the story to dantestack@gmail.com, and I'll answer those questions in an upcoming behind-the-scenes episode we're calling Solving the World. Guys, thank you for sticking with this story 49 episodes in. I hope it's rewarding. Please, whatever you can do to give back, to share this story with more people, do it. Share Solve the World on Facebook, share it on Twitter, share it on Tumblr, write a review for it on iTunes or whatever podcaster you're using to listen to Solve the World. Thank you for listening and engaging in Jennifer Dash's story. We'll see you next week on episode 50. Sacrifice has power. Sacrifice an innocent, and you are rewarded. Rewarded with what, you may ask? We don't yet know. The Jennifer Dash who began her trek in Louisiana has been spoiled, ripped apart both physically and emotionally by pain and never-ending hardship. Despite the weirdness of the center, it's leaving lasting marks on Jen's subconscious. She's learned that in order to move forward, you have to forget, and you cannot empathize. The haunting by the Pukas is no match for you if you just don't care. Next time, in our last episode of Part 2, we follow Jen to yet another continent. The world's after Jennifer Calling, desperate for this Jen to provide an answer before the world collectively dies out. But as is always true, the real danger doesn't come from without, but from within. Jen's going head-to-head with herself, in a battle of meaning and mind, while Marshall and Miles position themselves to reap the rich rewards of her power. Next time on Solve the World.